architects, architecture, urban planning, urban societies, they're not a luxury anymore. They're a necessity of life. How you design for either the rich or the poor, there's a lot of thought that has to go into it. Hello, my name is Isbah Hassan, and I'm a practicing architect. I've been practicing for pretty much the past 30 years of my life. It's been a very, very exciting journey, and we're here to have a very casual and a very informative talk about how architecture has evolved in Pakistan especially. To basically just highlight my own journey, I chose architecture when you're young and impressionable. I read Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead. Not that I ascribe to that philosophy now, but still at that time, it was very, formative for me. And this was one of the primary reasons I went into architecture. It's an extremely exciting field. It's not restricted. It encompasses about all aspects of life. And any given project will have something like 300 to 400 professionals involved in it, as well as different skill sets and materials and functionalities. So it's a larger than life thing. And it's there to stay for the next, 100 years at least, if not for an eternity. So that was primarily one of the reasons why I became an architect. The journey itself, since I'm Lahore-based, went to NCA for a little while. Then I moved to Chicago. I signed up with a very modern school, which was founded by Mies van der Rohe. It's called the Illinois Institute of Technology. And the next 5 years were pretty much there. They pretty much break you apart and teach you a whole new philosophy of architecture, which is about, you must have heard the sayings like form follows function, etc., etc. And, so there's a certain puritanical outlook towards architecture and a sensitivity to detail. So that has been ingrained in me. After graduating, I worked in Chicago for a little while with some very exciting firms, which primarily did high-rises and very, very large-scale projects. Came back, worked with a few architectural practices. And I think the next 5 years was tough in the sense I was working with different firms and then having children as well. So it became a huge balancing act. So once I was, we moved around quite a bit. I was in Lahore, then Karachi, then we went to Sri Lanka for a bit. There we met some amazing architects, worked with them for a little while as well. Moved back to Lahore, Islamabad. So once I came back to Lahore, I think I went to one of my ex-bosses and said, why don't you give me a job? So he quoted something which was so ridiculous, and I said that, maybe, it won't be possible for me to work with that salary. So I started a small setup. I remember it was my parents were very gracious. They gave me their garage to work from. So I set up my practice, from a garage. And frankly, I've never looked back. So gradually we improved our office, and it worked, more to our benefit. And currently we're handling over 80 projects in our firm right now, which are spread all over Pakistan and the Middle East, and a few in more like the United Kingdom. So that's how the journey has been. It's been really, really exciting. To highlight quite a few things, there's a lot that's happening. When I started out, we had our role models, the women who were there, amazing women, Yasmin Lari, Fawzia Qureshi, Yasmin Chima, to name a few, who were top of the pyramid. And now there are lots of young women who are coming through, and we've always looked towards them. I always believe that it's about the excellence of your work which is not gender specific. Yes, being a woman and working in a patriarchal society is a little tough. And you have to prove yourself over and over again, and the challenges are still there. So that's how it is for generally women in architecture and in other fields in Pakistan. So a little piece of advice to the youngsters who are coming up, amazing. I think they're the energy and the future of this country. Just hang in there and prove your worth and never give up. as far as our architectural practices are concerned. Unfortunately, architects tend to be the underdogs of society, at least this society. You know, we're not star architects, we're not the Zaha Hadids or, you know, the Frank Gehry's, you know, who would be given that opportunity to flex our intellectual muscle. One request to general people is like, you know, allow the architects a little freedom as well to come up with, you know, little sort of concepts which are a little more exciting than your standard, you know, whatever run-of-the-mill things that people do generally tell us. It's kind of sad, you know. I mean, we've established a whole bunch of Pinterest architects, and, you know, I'm kind of guilty of that as well. But sometimes to save time, you said, "Haan, bhi Pinterest se dekho aur ye kuch karke de do client ko." But please try to cultivate the true essence of architecture. I mean, normally the architects are dictated to. All right, please don't do that. Because you don't go to a doctor and tell them कि हमें हमारा इलाज ऐसे करें या हमें ये पसंद है हमें ये नहीं पसंद. You know, when somebody, you know, comes up who doesn't have that backing in architecture, who's a self-styled architect, for God's sake, just take a back seat and let us do our work. It's also a question of economics and the kind of respect that you want to give a particular profession. I think in Pakistan, it's a little lopsided because obviously the person who has the most money is going to call the shots. So you really can't expect, you know, the same amount of weightage if the architect makes maybe, let's say, 10 rupees, you know, per project, and your contractor is making 1,000 rupees. So that's the kind of disparity that I'm talking about. We need to increase the economic sustainability of architects also and make them at par with the construction teams. I mean, that's a necessity of the times, you know. So there has to be some revenue sharing somewhere. How it's done, I mean, that's a long debate for another time, maybe. Interestingly enough, now there is like everybody is doing housing schemes now because obviously it's very lucrative, and even people who were doing other businesses have left their businesses, and this is the new mantra. Like the 80s was about textiles, now it's all about doing your own societies. And oh my God, you know, like, I mean, the whole country is turned into a big housing society. I just feel that way. And it is scary at the same time because, you know, urban planning is a specialization in itself, and it requires a lot of thought because for future generations, you are deciding how people are going to live. Unfortunately, yahan pe wo thought nahi hai. The thought is, how do I make more money? Okay, which is fine as well. We should be making more money, but at the same time, there should be an awareness of where we are going with all of this also. There has to be a direction. There has to be a sensibility to it all. We belong to a very historically rich country, but at the same time, we cannot reproduce the past. We have to make our vocabulary very global and very relevant. How do I see the urban societies developing over the years? More sustainability, ease of living, more specialization, like take out specialities. I mean, earlier on, it was just 1 or 2 restaurants which catered to a particular restaurant. Now you have all sorts of services available. Homemade food, green food, you know, organic food, everything is available for you. So life is becoming more contained, less sprawling, and more specialized, and it's just the way the world moves, you know. I mean, if somebody had told people living in the ancient times that there will be huge tin carriers carrying people into the air, nobody would have believed them. Everything that you can think of or dream of in life is a possibility. That is how we need to approach our urban cities as well, because we're at ground zero right now. We can so get it right. We can do everything and right, but right now, unfortunately, everything is going wrong. You know, it's, again, you know, I mean, there has to be a balance in the intellectual and the practical side of it all. And you need to bring in architects and thinkers and make them mainstream rather than just, you know, think of them as people who are on the fringes of society, who are just, you know, a luxury if nothing else. Architects, architecture, urban planning, urban societies, they're not a luxury anymore. They're a necessity of life. How you design for either the rich or the poor, there's a lot of thought that has to go into it. There is an energy crisis in the world. There is a global warming scenario that you have to think of. You have to think of sustainability. You have to think of your health. There's so many factors that come into it. The best cities are in the world, and people flock to them for a particular reason, because they're well thought out, well planned. Paris, for example, it was all burnt down in the 1900s, and they rebuilt that city. And there was a thought process behind the city. So, well, ancient cities like Lahore, Rome, or Mallorca, or Malaga, they organically grow. Lahore has organically grown as well. But when you see the mushrooming of the urban sprawl, I think you really need to take a step back and think it through. And you need people who dedicated to it and who are trained for it to be able to kind of call the shots, as opposed to some random developer who comes in and says, okay, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, and I'll stick a few things here and there, and we can make it work. It's not going to work like that. Think it through, please. Zara dil mein thoda sa dard hona chahiye apne aap ke liye, apni future generations ke liye, apne mulk ke liye bhi. Okay, it's not all about the money. Money will come. Okay, whether you're doing something good or bad, eventually it will come, but it always takes, it's the same cost. Good design, bad design, cost तो वही होगी. तो आप बेहतर नहीं है कि आप अच्छा डिज़ाइन कर लें और एक खूबसूरत चीज़ बनाएं और आपके बच्चों के लिए अच्छा हो, आपकी generations के लिए भी बहुत अच्छा हो. Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure being here, and I hope I haven't offended too many people. And the whole idea is to kind of push this specific field forward in Pakistan. And we should have our own star architects, and we should have our own, global players, and rather than just Pinterest architects, which is great and bad at the same time.